I may be the least religious person you've ever had come speak here. And I'll talk about that a little bit more as I give you a little background on myself. But there's been a lot of knocks on the door in my life as it relates to religion. And maybe some of you can relate, maybe you can't. I've ignored the knocks quite a long time. April 2002 was the day I answered the door. Remember it to this day and changed my life ever since. Tell them a little bit about yourself, tell them a little bit about your job, and tell them a little bit about your faith. And I thought about, how do I break that into three? I'm not really sure that I can. So hopefully I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, and in that you'll get a little bit about my job. And I think my faith, unfortunately or fortunately, is just intertwined through the whole process. And I had the first knock at my door when I met my wife, who's a good good Christian across the board. But she was the first loud knock to try to bring me in, and I kind of played the charade game and went to all the things, but really, was thinking about work as somebody was talking to me about Christ. My second large knock on my door, I was 29 years old. I worked at Procter & Gamble, and it's actually funny that it's Florida, but I got a job offer to come work in Tampa, Florida. It was for a company that actually printed coupons. It's a long story, but a company had just gone public. They were pretty flush with cash. At the time, I was the brand manager at Crest Toothpaste. So if anybody here wants to talk about tartar control or gum health, I'm your man. I'll spend way too much time talking about the health of your gums. But so I had an opportunity to go there and be the executive vice president of sales and marketing at 29, which I thought was unbelievable. And I heard things like stock options and car allowance, investing, things I'd never heard of at 29, and a signing bonus, which I thought only athletes got. And my wife was pregnant with our first. We lived in Cincinnati. And so I flew back from Tampa to tell her the good news, of course. We're moving to Tampa, and wait till you hear what we're going to make for a living. So we went to dinner, at our club, actually, in Cincinnati, like this, and I gave her the whole spiel, and like a good marriage, my wife is polar opposite of me, so she doesn't speak much, because how could she, right? So we're sitting across, and I finished my whole spiel waiting, and she, of course, had the poker face the whole time. I keep waiting for the, I love you, arms around you, what kind of car am I going to drive? And she said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, what do you mean? She goes, well, what are you going to do on the job? And I realized, I haven't actually explained the job. And I said, well, it's kind of blew it off. She goes, well, but do you like that? I mean, is that exciting, that work? And I said, well, but did I tell you about the signing bonus? And she actually looked at me and she said, I'll never forget, she said, I'm surprised and a little disappointed. And if your wife ever says she's a little disappointed, you know what that feels like, guys. That's like, you might as well just kick me, and I saved the disappointed word because you got me. And she said, I always thought you did what you loved and you loved what you did. This seems awfully financial. And you've always had opportunity to do things financial. Why would you do this? And I'll never forget getting sweaty and uncomfortable as she was talking. And I don't usually get uncomfortable. And she said to me after the interview, do you feel okay? You're like shining up. And I said, no, I feel terrible because I think I'm right. And so anyway, obviously I passed on that job, but it was my first loud career knock, which is, what are you doing? What's the end goal? So I went to meet Bob Nagley, and we've never had this conversation, but I'll tell you all like I'll do in front of Bob. When I met Bob, we were going to have dinner, and he said, do you mind if we pray before dinner? And reached his hands out. And I've never met this guy. And I'm saying, pray? I mean, I haven't prayed before a meal in 12 years probably when he said that. And in the prayer, he thanked the Lord for bringing us together. He said in his prayer, we all realize there's no such thing as coincidence. Mike and I are here for a reason. I hope you'll show us what that reason is. But probably don't think I remember that, but it was a big knock on the door at my time. At the end of the interview, Bob put his arm around me, as Bob does, and he said, I need you. Will you come think about doing this? And I remember thinking, walking out, I've never been asked to come somewhere because they need me. I mean, even if they did, no one's ever said, I need you. And I walked into the door of the house that night, and my wife said, what's wrong? As only wives could know. And I said, I met a guy tonight that I think might have been more than coincidence. And it certainly was more than coincidence. It was the next loud faith knock on the door. Again, me paying no attention to the knock, but at least I heard it, which was an interesting time. When we had our second child, I have 3 boys. My wife is convinced that I've prayed so hard for a daughter that I now have 640 professional daughters. And like your daughters, they're fairly social, and they're not afraid to share their opinion with me as long as it's in a text message. Heaven forbid they would actually answer their cell phone, but they'll text me. we'll be sitting on the couch at home, and all of a sudden my BlackBerry will just go nuts, and she'll go, rain delay? And I'll say, rain delay, which means if we're playing a tournament somewhere and we get a rain delay and 144 players have to go sit in the locker room, at some point they're going to start talking about the commissioner or the rules or TV. And I'm going to text him first. And all of a sudden I get 400 text messages, But when my second son was born, this is really the last big knock on my door. There was something wrong with him, and we didn't know what it was. He seemed to be a pretty normal child until he was about a year old. And then from the first year to the second year, he started to regress in a pretty significant way. Now, I have 3 boys, so I have an older and a younger in between him. So it was pretty easy for us to track progress. I mean, it's not like, you go to the doctor and he's on the 175th percentile and, I'm raising Shaquille O'Neal. I knew that things weren't right. And so we were at church, and I'd never really partaken in the give yourself to the Lord speech. It was being honest with you, and I remember my wife saying on the way there, let's just put this in the hands of the Lord. And I used to think that's a good way of saying let's just not do anything. I mean, that's really was my translation. So anyway, for some reason, I said to the Lord that day, I'm out of ideas, and if you can give me any, I'll take them. And, of course, by the time church was over, drove home and, started watching football and was back to my normal no knocks at the door. And the next day, God's honest truth, the next day I got a letter from my parents. And my dad had mailed me an article from the newspaper about autism. And the note from my dad said, this will be tough to tell you, said, we've known this for a while, but it's time for you to know. We've had this to mail to you for months, but I finally had to put it in the mail to you. And he essentially said, I think your son has autism. And as any belligerent kid would do, I was mad at my dad, of course, for telling me the truth. There's nothing worse as a kid than when your dad's right, of course. I've learned that the hard way as a parent. And so, I said to my dad, how could you possibly? And then, of course, I just left it on my desk at my office, actually. And every day I'd look at that thing. And sooner or later, we started down the path of finding out. The good news, for the audience is my son Wesley, turned out to not be autistic, but certainly has some pretty significant learning disorders. And had we not started down the autism path, we never would have identified the things we ended up identifying. And he's a straight A, freshman in high school student today. But it was an interesting path for 3 or 4 years. But that was the first time I answered the door. First time I answered the knock on the door. And I've said this in many fellowship groups, and I've said this to people who are never in a fellowship group. You can't ignore the knock forever. And the only advice I'd give anybody here who isn't there today is, if you decide to open the door, just leave it open. If you take the chance one time and say, as my wife would say, I'm such a control freak that I can't watch TV unless I have the remote control, and that is true. I don't care how old my kids get; they will never be bequeathed the remote control. And my wife said that our family's lives changed, which is true, and certainly my life changed when I gave up the remote control on my life, and that's true. I mean, I always thought it would be scary to live life without holding the remote control. And I really found out that it was much more scary to actually be holding the remote control. So that kind of got me here. I think the combination of my son and Bob Nagley were the seeds that actually finally grew a faith tree in my family that didn't exist. And it's great to tell that story to my kids because I don't know where they are in the process. And quite frankly, I can't, much as I'd like to, I can't speed their process. And now, I realize that Bob and I didn't meet in coincidence. He was the seed, and so it's a tremendous responsibility handed forward that, I got to plant a few as well. And if I do today, great. If I don't today, so be it. But the key thing for me to remember is somebody got through the door and helped me kind of let him in. And so hopefully you guys can do the same. Last knock on the door I'll give you is, so after my son went through what he went through, and I met Bob, I had sort of opened up that it was time, a new time for a new chapter in my life. So my wife and I packed up the kids on Sunday morning, and there was a United Methodist church right up the street from where we lived. So we thought the church started at 8:30. So we pulled into the parking lot. At 8:30, there was one car in the parking lot, and there was a volunteer coming out, and she was putting up tables, like setting up for the day. And I said, when does Mass begin? My Catholic coming out. And she said, it doesn't start here till 9:30. So, of course, we're dressed up. We haven't done this in 6 months. So I said to my wife, no, we're not waiting an hour. Let's go find another one. And she goes, let's just wait. And I said, how about that really big church we drive by all the time, right off the highway? And she goes, I don't want to go to anything big. They just feel like a part of the numbers. Well, of course, I won remote control. And we go into this big church. Well, this church turns out to be Saddleback Church. And the guy walks out. His name's Rick Warren, who meant nothing to me. And Rick Warren starts. And he starts, which is amazing, saying, I'll bet there's somebody in the audience that don't want to be here today. And I'm thinking, is he looking at me? I'll bet that there's some in the audience that have never really given their life to Jesus Christ. And now I'm like sliding down, going, cover me, honey. He's coming in. And we've gone to Rick Warren. That was in 2002, in April 2002, and I've gone ever since. I read it's funny, bought his book, The Purpose-Driven Life, and then The Purpose-Driven Church, and I can't tell how many planes I've been on where somebody else is reading it. It becomes the stimulus for more conversation and more group dialogue. So it's a strange deal, and for those of you who just came because you're interested in golf, or you got a tee time and it's starting to get nicer, and so, stop talking, Mike, that's fine. But I was like some of you maybe in the room, completely oblivious to the knock. And I would tell you that I really thought nothing was missing in my life. I had control, right? I had the remote, and I felt like I was a good person. I didn't need the Lord to make me do the right thing. I didn't cheat. I didn't lie. I was good to my family. I had my priorities generally in order outside of travel. So I kind of felt like, what's the purpose? But as I said in our morning prayer today, and I'll say to you that it's amazing how much scarier life is when you're in control than when you hand over control. And that might sound like a complete comment to some of you, but at some point when you just literally, sit down at night and say, I'm done with ideas, it's your turn, you'll be amazing how long they've been standing on the other side of the door just waiting, because the patience of the Lord is unbelievable. And so I would just tell you that if you decide to open the door, as I always tell friends, leave it open. For me, religion was like floss. I only used it when something big was coming up or something hurt. If somebody in the family was hurting, I was praying. But as soon as that person got better, I was good. And that was floss. And when I realized that, daily flossing not only keeps you healthier, it just makes you feel better. That it was actually kind of got my head around it. So not sure, Steve, if that has anything to do with why you guys invited me, but that's kind of my story. I'm proud to be invited. I'm really proud to be the commissioner of the LPGA because I think, bar none, we are the greatest sports franchise in the history of the world, and I mean men or women. If you don't believe that, you've never been to an LPGA event. If you believe that men's golf is just more interesting than women's golf, prove it to yourself. Come to an LPGA event, play in a Pro-Am. You'll change your mind instantly. I know that because I've been a part of all of it. And it's just, it's my pitch to you that I joined this because of what it was before I got here, not what it was after I'm here. And I'm smart enough to get out of the way of the product on a pretty regular basis.